I would say truth is stranger than fiction, but nowadays being stranger than fiction isn't enough. Biographies and historical books should come with the label, yes, it's all true. Nowhere is easier to explore the inherent flaws of humanity than racism, and Spike Lee's chosen the very obvious target, extremism. Would it be more nuanced and helpful for the film to instead focus on casual or institutional racism? Yes, but for what it's worth, Lee's done wonders with focusing on the worst of the worst. The extremists' racists are so callow and superficial it really makes you question, how do these guys even exist? And the answer is, we're in post-Trump times. We shouldn't be reckoning with how it exists. We should be figuring out how to stamp it out. In any other story, the villains would be criticised for being too one-dimensional and simple. But you've got the perfect excuse. This really does exist. The question of the film is, how do we reckon with it? The answer is that you can't go about debating terrorists because you've got to fight them on the streets where they want to cause the most damage. Since this is the 70s, the white men of the police force are initially focused on the Black Panthers, and in a baller move, Spike unequivocally shows them as the heroes, despite or because of their explosive rhetoric. The way it's presented in the film is that our hero Ron Stallworth is inspired by the Black Panther meeting to focus on white nationalism instead. It's debated if there's any use in infiltrating a supposedly dead Klan organisation, but they of course are never stagnant. They're always bubbling underneath the surface. Even supposedly neutral positions like the white undercover police officer realises he's in just as much danger, since bizarrely Klan members hate Jewish people just as much as black people. We're discovering in the Trump era that white extremism is becoming more and more exclusionary. A focus on genealogy, religion, and place of birth is just as important as white skin. With the bad guy from The Handmaid's Tale as our second in command, I wonder if there comes a time when even atheists are demonised as well. Or is it okay as long as you're white? We'll find out sooner than we'd like. It's interesting that the film tackling extremism doesn't explore the struggles members of the Klan go through. The film shows them as fickle idiots barely able to execute any particular acts of terrorism. Although there is an interesting critique of David Duke, current real-life man who's been alive long enough to advocate for Trump. It shows him as a man who believes wholeheartedly in the superiority of white men, but largely doing nothing about it. The Klan seems to just circle jerk without really going into the outside world, which is what was assumed was the current status of racists pre-Trump. If they exist, they're largely in hide holes rather than, say, being energised by an effective demagogue. Spike's film is a largely standard undercover cop film with a fairy tale ending that tricks the audience into thinking it's okay and that everything is a positive outlook like every shithouse documentary. But this film has a killer punchline. The racists are calling from inside the house. After ending on a largely positive note, the film then turns dark. Footage from 2017's Charlottesville rally is shown where there's just insane chaos with death being dealt with from any means necessary. The whole point of the film? While there's hidden institutional racism and unconscious bias, the main threat is from the most obvious idiots. These guys have existed and always will. It's just a matter of how much society is willing to put up with them. The most on-the-nose line, to the point where the whole finger is stuck up the nose, is where one of the characters frets about the idea of a president being a white supremacist sympathiser. Surely not. They almost turn to camera and pull the dumbest face. I can't believe we have to run through this again. The film is nothing groundbreaking, but it's an incredibly digestible reassertion that our complacency with racism is leading to some dark territory. 8 out of 10. I also have a podcast in which I have discussed the political news stories of today. Thank you for hopefully watching.